You've been told your whole life that bullies are just insecure, that they'll grow out of it, that if you ignore them, they'll go away. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. Bullies often do when they get promoted. They get the attention. They get their way. But there's one secret they desperately hope you never figure out. Let's start with what everyone gets wrong about bullies. We picture the stereotypical schoolyard bully, some troubled kid acting out because of problems at home. But that's not the full picture. Research shows that many bullies are actually quite popular, socially skilled, and come from stable backgrounds. They're not broken people lashing out randomly. They're strategic. They understand power dynamics better than most adults. Adult bullies run companies, lead social groups, and dominate online spaces. They've learned that aggression, manipulation, and intimidation are effective tools for getting what they want. And here's the kicker: society often rewards them for it. We call it leadership. We call it being decisive. We call it knowing what you want. So why do bullies seem to always win? 3 reasons. First, they're willing to cross lines others won't. While you're playing by the rules of basic human decency, they're exploiting every loophole in the social contract. Second, they target people who won't fight back effectively. Bullies have an almost supernatural ability to identify who will fold under pressure, who values harmony over conflict, who will internalize the abuse rather than expose it. Third, bystanders enable them. Good people stay silent because confronting a bully is uncomfortable, risky, and exhausting. The bully counts on this. Secret bullies don't want you to know is this: they're actually operating from a position of profound weakness, not strength. But here's what they don't want you to know: their entire system depends on you not understanding how it works. Think about it. If you had genuine confidence, real power, authentic charisma, would you need to tear others down to feel good about yourself? Would you need to control and intimidate to get cooperation? Everyone, including themselves, that their aggression equals strength. But aggression is what you use when you don't have actual power. It's a desperate performance. A truly confident person doesn't need to diminish others to shine. They don't need to hoard information or create artificial scarcity of approval. They don't need to make you feel small to feel big. Here's the psychological reality. Bullies are addicted to a very specific type of validation. They need to see fear, submission, or distress in others to regulate their own emotional state. Without that external validation of their dominance, they actually feel powerless. Studies show that people who engage in bullying behavior often have dysregulated emotional systems. They literally cannot maintain emotional stability without external proof of their superiority. That's not strength. That's dependency. Once you understand this, you start seeing the pattern everywhere. The boss who takes credit for your work isn't confident in their abilities. They're terrified you'll outshine them. The friend who constantly puts you down isn't secure in the relationship. They're afraid you'll realize you deserve better. The online troll who attacks everything you post isn't expressing strength. They're desperately trying to feel relevant. Every bully follows the same playbook because they all have the same core wound. They believe, deep down, that they're not enough. So they create elaborate systems to make you feel like you're not enough instead. But here's where it gets interesting. The entire bullying system has a fatal flaw. It requires your participation, not just your silence, your actual emotional investment in their opinion of you. Think about the last time someone tried to bully you. What hurt wasn't really their words or actions. What hurt was that part of you that wondered if they might be right. That's the hook. That's what they're counting on. When you don't take the bait, when you don't get defensive, don't try to prove them wrong. Don't shrink away in shame. Something interesting happens. The bully has to escalate. And escalation reveals desperation. I learned this the hard way in corporate America. There was this manager who made it their mission to undermine me in every meeting. Constant interruptions, dismissive comments, taking credit for my ideas. For months, I tried to prove myself worthy of their respect. I worked harder, prepared more, anticipated their objections. But nothing changed. Because I was playing their game. The day everything shifted was when I realized I didn't need their validation to do good work. I stopped defending myself and started documenting. I stopped trying to win their approval and started focusing on results. I stopped reacting emotionally and started responding strategically. You know what happened? They became increasingly erratic, more obvious in their sabotage, more desperate in their attempts to provoke me. And that's when other people started noticing. Not my complaints about being bullied, but their increasingly unhinged behavior. Within 6 months, they were quietly transferred to another department. Here's what I learned. Bullies need you to play their game more than you need to win it. When you stop playing, they don't know what to do. Their entire identity is built around being able to affect you. Take that away, and they're just someone having an emotional meltdown in public. First, stop defending yourself against false accusations. This doesn't mean accepting them. It means refusing to give them more weight than they deserve. When someone says you're incompetent, the defensive response is to list all your accomplishments. The powerful response is I disagree and then moving on to the actual work. Second, stop trying to understand their motivation. I know this sounds counterintuitive. We've been taught that understanding leads to compassion, and compassion leads to resolution. But with bullies, your attempts to understand them are interpreted as validation of their behavior. They're not looking for understanding. They're looking for supply. Your confusion, your pain, your desperate attempts to make sense of their behavior. That's what feeds them. Third, start documenting everything. Not for revenge. Not to build a case, but to ground yourself in reality when they inevitably try to gaslight you. Bullies are masters of making you question your own perception of events. That's not what I said. You're being too sensitive. I was just joking. Documentation isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Fourth, find your people. One of the most insidious things about bullying is how it isolates you. Bullies are often charismatic to everyone except their targets. This makes you feel crazy, like you're the only one seeing their true nature. But here's the thing. You're never the only target. Bullies have patterns. They have histories. If you're dealing with a workplace bully, there are others who've experienced their behavior. If you're dealing with a social bully, there are others they've excluded or undermined. The key is finding these people without making it about the bully. Don't bond over shared victimhood. Bond over shared values, shared goals, shared vision for something better. I once thought I was the only person struggling with a particular toxic team leader. Turns out, in casual conversations with colleagues, I discovered that 5 other people had similar experiences. We didn't form an anti-Sarah coalition. We formed a working group focused on improving project communication. Sarah's behavior became impossible to ignore when it started affecting the group's work. Not because we complained about her, but because her dysfunction was now visible against the backdrop of a healthier alternative. This is crucial. You don't defeat bullies by attacking them. You defeat them by building something better and making their toxicity incompatible with it. Fifth, set boundaries without negotiating them. Bullies love to debate boundaries. They want to argue about what's reasonable, what's fair, what's justified. Don't explain yourself. Don't justify your limits. Don't provide evidence for why you deserve basic respect. I don't accept being spoken to that way is a complete sentence. That behavior doesn't work for me requires no further explanation. I'm ending this conversation now doesn't need a reason. The moment you start explaining why your boundary is reasonable, you've invited them to convince you it isn't. Here's what happens when you consistently apply these principles. Something most people don't expect. The bully doesn't usually have a dramatic comeuppance. They don't get fired or socially ostracized or publicly humiliated. What happens is much more subtle and, frankly, more satisfying. They become irrelevant to your experience. Their opinion stops mattering. Their approval becomes unnecessary. Their disapproval becomes meaningless. You realize that the power they had over you was always contingent on your participation. And without your participation, they're just someone making noise in the background. I ran into that corporate manager 2 years later at an industry conference. They tried to engage me in conversation, probably expecting some lingering tension or awkwardness. But I felt nothing. No anger, no vindication, no need to prove anything. They had become a person I used to know who happened to be standing in front of me. This brings us to the deeper truth about bullying that nobody talks about. The reason bullying is so traumatic isn't because someone is mean to you. It's because it reveals how much of your self-worth you've outsourced to other people's opinions. Where you still need external validation to feel okay about yourself. Where you still believe other people get to determine your value. This is why the advice to just ignore bullies doesn't work. You can't ignore someone whose opinion matters to you. And if their opinion matters to you, it's because some part of you believes they might be right. The real work isn't learning how to deal with bullies. The real work is learning how to be so grounded in your own worth that their assessment of you becomes irrelevant data. It means developing the discernment to distinguish between feedback that serves your growth and manipulation that serves someone else's ego. Constructive feedback is specific, actionable, and delivered with care for your success. Bullying is vague, personal, and delivered to make the other person feel superior. Once you understand this distinction, everything changes. You stop trying to win over people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop explaining yourself to people who are determined to remain confused about your motives. You stop seeking approval from people whose opinion you wouldn't respect if it were about anyone else. And here's the beautiful irony. The moment you stop needing their validation, you often start getting their respect. Not because you've changed their mind about you, but because people are drawn to self-possession. Even bullies. Some of the people who tried to diminish me early in my career later sought out my mentorship. Not because I proved them wrong, but because I stopped trying to. Other people start thinking, if they don't have to tolerate that, maybe I don't either. The bully's power was always dependent on everyone agreeing to pretend their behavior was normal. When you stop pretending, the spell starts breaking. This is why bullies often escalate when you first start setting boundaries. They sense the threat to their entire system. If you can opt out, others might too. But if you hold steady, if you don't react to the escalation or get pulled back into the drama, they usually move on to easier targets. Because remember, they need your emotional engagement more than you need their approval. This dynamic isn't just about individual bullies. It's about how power works in general. Systems of oppression rely on the participation of the oppressed. Not just their compliance, but their internalization of the system's values. When you stop believing that someone else's approval determines your worth, you become dangerous to any system that depends on your insecurity. This is why dictators fear artists, writers, and freethinkers more than armies. It's not because they're physically threatening. It's because they model a different way of being. They show that the emperor has no clothes. The bully in your life is a microcosm of this larger dynamic. When you refuse to be diminished, you're not just changing your own experience. You're challenging the entire mythology that some people are worth more than others. Now, let's be real about the practical challenges. Sometimes the bully is your boss, and you need the job. Sometimes they're a family member, and leaving isn't simple. Sometimes they control resources you need. In these situations, you can't always remove yourself from the dynamic immediately, but you can still work on removing the dynamic from yourself. You can't control their behavior, but you can control how much real estate it takes up in your mind. You can't make them respect you, but you can stop needing them to. You can't change their opinion, but you can change how much their opinion affects your self-concept. This internal work is often harder than the external confrontation, because it requires you to examine your own relationship with power, approval, and self-worth. Why does their opinion matter so much? What are you afraid will happen if they don't like you? What story are you telling yourself about what their approval means? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Because until you understand your own psychological hooks, you'll keep getting caught by people who know how to use them. I remember journaling about that corporate manager and realizing that I was afraid that if they didn't respect me, it meant I wasn't ready for the promotion I wanted. I had outsourced my assessment of my own readiness to someone who had every incentive to undermine my confidence. The moment I understood that, their opinion lost its power over me. Dealing with bullies effectively requires developing specific skills that, frankly, most of us weren't taught. Emotional regulation under pressure, clear communication without defensiveness, strategic thinking about relationships and power dynamics. These aren't just anti-bullying skills. These are leadership skills, life skills, success skills. The same qualities that make you immune to bullying make you effective in almost every other area of life. Confidence without arrogance, boundaries without hostility, self-advocacy without defensiveness. This is why I actually feel grateful for my experiences with workplace bullies. Not because the experience was pleasant, but because it forced me to develop capacities I wouldn't have otherwise cultivated. Every bully in your life is offering you a curriculum in self-possession. They're showing you exactly where you still give your power away, where you still need others to validate your reality, where you still believe someone else's dysfunction is somehow your responsibility to fix. The goal isn't to become hard or closed off. It's to become so secure in your own worth that you can afford to be generous with others, without losing yourself in the process. This is the paradox. The more secure you become, the more generous you can afford to be. When you don't need someone's approval, you can actually see them more clearly. You can have compassion for their insecurity without taking responsibility for it. You can set boundaries without hatred. I now understand that the manager who tried to undermine me was operating from their own deep insecurity about their position. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it explains it in a way that doesn't require me to be the villain in their story. They weren't attacking me because I was inadequate. They were attacking me because they were afraid I was adequate enough to threaten their position. Understanding this doesn't mean I would choose to work with them again, but it does mean I don't carry resentment about the experience. So what does the actual transformation process look like? Phase 1, recognition. You start noticing the patterns, how they operate, how you respond, how the dynamic perpetuates itself. Phase 2, experimentation. You try different responses. Some work, some don't. You learn what triggers your old patterns and what supports new ones. Phase 3. Integration. The new responses become natural. You stop having to think about how to handle their behavior because you're no longer invested in changing it. Phase 4. Transcendence. This is where most people don't expect to go. You actually start feeling compassion for them. Not the codependent kind that enables their behavior, but the kind that comes from understanding the prison they've created for themselves. These same principles apply to every difficult person in your life. The passive-aggressive family member, the competitive friend, the manipulative romantic partner, the demanding client. They're all running variations of the same program, trying to regulate their internal emotional state by controlling your external behavior. And they can only succeed if you participate. Participation doesn't just mean compliance. Fighting back emotionally is still participation. Trying to prove them wrong is participation. Defending yourself is participation. Explaining why they're being unfair is participation. The only non-participation is indifference to their assessment of you. Not performed indifference. Not defensive indifference. Genuine indifference. This doesn't mean you don't care about anything. It means you don't care about their opinion of you more than your own experience of yourself. When someone tries to make you feel small, and you genuinely don't shrink, something shifts in the entire dynamic. They have to find someone else to regulate their emotions. Let's talk about what's really happening energetically. Bullies are emotional vampires. They literally feed off emotional reactions. Your anger, your hurt, your confusion, your desperation to be understood, that's their food. When you react emotionally, you're feeding them. When you withdraw in fear, you're feeding them. When you try to appease them, you're feeding them. The only way to starve them is to stop providing the emotional reaction they're seeking. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally flat. It means keeping your emotional responses for people who've earned access to them. I learned to think of my emotional energy as a precious resource. Not everyone gets access to it, especially not people who've proven they'll misuse it. When you truly integrate this understanding, something magical happens. You realize how much mental and emotional energy you've been wasting on people whose opinion of you was never going to change anyway. All those hours spent replaying conversations, all that mental bandwidth devoted to figuring out what you did wrong, all that creativity channeled into strategizing how to win their approval. When you reclaim all that energy and redirect it toward people and projects that actually matter to you, your life transforms. Not because the bullies disappear, but because they become irrelevant. You stop organizing your life around avoiding their disapproval and start organizing it around pursuing your actual goals. This brings up an important point about goal clarity. One reason bullies are so effective is that they give us a clear, immediate goal. Make them stop. Make them approve of us. Make them see reason. Make them leave us alone. But these are all reactive goals. They're defined by what you don't want rather than what you do want. When you shift to proactive goals, what you actually want to create, achieve, or become, their behavior becomes a minor distraction rather than a major obstacle. I stopped trying to make that manager respect me and started focusing on doing work I was proud of. I stopped trying to fix their dysfunction and started building relationships with people who shared my values. I stopped reacting to their provocations and started responding to opportunities. Within a year, I had been promoted twice and transferred to a different department where my work was actually valued. Not because I defeated the bully, but because I stopped letting them define my professional reality. None of this work happens in isolation. You need people who see your worth when you're struggling to see it yourself. You need models of healthy conflict resolution. You need perspective when you're too close to the situation to see it clearly. But here's the crucial part. Your support system can't be built around shared victimhood. If your primary bond with someone is that you both hate the same person, that's not support, that's enabling. Healthy support helps you become stronger, more capable, more self-possessed. Unhealthy support keeps you focused on the problem rather than the solution. I had to actually distance myself from some colleagues who wanted to bond over complaining about our toxic manager. Not because they were bad people, but because staying in that energy was keeping me stuck in victim mode. Let's talk about victim mode for a minute. Being victimized by someone's behavior is a factual experience. Staying in victim mode is a choice. This doesn't mean blaming yourself for being bullied. It means recognizing that your power lies in your response, not in their behavior. There's a crucial distinction between responsibility and blame. You're not responsible for their behavior. You are responsible for your response to their behavior. You're not responsible for their emotions. You are responsible for your own emotions. You're not responsible for fixing them. You are responsible for protecting yourself. When you take responsibility for your part without taking responsibility for their part, you reclaim your power. This is the difference between why are they doing this to me and how am I going to respond to this. The first question keeps you stuck. The second question moves you forward. It took me months to make this shift. I was so invested in understanding why they were treating me unfairly that I wasn't focusing on how I was going to succeed despite their treatment. Some of my greatest professional achievements happened while I was dealing with workplace bullies. Not because the bullying motivated me, but because learning to succeed despite opposition is a crucial life skill. The world is full of people who will doubt you, underestimate you, or actively work against you. If your success depends on everyone supporting you, you'll never achieve anything significant. Learning to thrive while someone is actively trying to undermine you is like training with weights. When you're finally in an environment where people support you, you feel like you can fly. That toxic manager actually prepared me for much bigger challenges later in my career, because I learned how to stay focused on my goals when someone was actively trying to distract me from them. Distraction is one of bullying's most insidious effects. They consume your mental bandwidth. They hijack your emotional energy. They derail your creative flow. Even when you're not interacting with them, you're thinking about them, planning what you'll say next time, rehearsing how you'll defend yourself, imagining scenarios where you finally get through to them. All of that mental activity is energy that could be going toward your actual goals. The bully wins not just when they make you feel bad. They win when they make themselves the center of your attention. I realized I was spending more mental energy on one difficult person than on all my positive relationships combined. That's when I knew something had to change. I started doing what I call an attention audit. Throughout the day, I would notice what I was thinking about. How much mental space was I giving to the bully versus to my actual priorities? The results were shocking. I was giving this person more attention than my closest friends, more mental energy than my most important projects, more emotional investment than my own growth. That's when I implemented what I call attention discipline. Just like you train your body at the gym, you can train your mind to focus on what serves you. Every time I caught myself ruminating about their behavior, I would consciously redirect my attention to something that actually mattered to me. At first, it felt forced, but gradually, it became automatic. As I redirected my attention toward my goals, something interesting happened. I started making progress faster than ever before, not because the obstacles disappeared, but because I stopped spending my energy on obstacles I couldn't control. and started focusing on opportunities I could influence. The bully was still there, still being difficult, but they were no longer the main character in my professional story. They had become background noise. My work quality improved because I wasn't constantly distracted by interpersonal drama. My relationships with other colleagues deepened because I had emotional energy to invest in them. My creativity flourished because my mind was free to focus on solutions rather than problems. This is the ultimate victory over bullying. Not defeating the bully, but making them irrelevant to your success. Making someone irrelevant to your success is different from ignoring them. Ignoring implies they still have power that you're choosing not to acknowledge. Irrelevance means their power over you has actually dissolved. You know you've achieved irrelevance when thinking about them feels the same as thinking about any other random person. No charge, no emotional activation, no need to defend or explain or justify. They become like weather, sometimes stormy, sometimes calm, but not something you take personally or try to control. The last time I interacted with that toxic manager, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction that I had won. Not residual anger about how they had treated me. Just nothing. When you reclaim all the energy you were spending on bullies, you discover how much of your life force was being drained. It's like removing a background program that was constantly running on your mental computer. Suddenly everything runs faster and smoother. The goal isn't to change their behavior. It's to reclaim your energy, your time, your mind, your sense of peace. Once I stopped giving my energy to people who hadn't earned it, everything in my life started accelerating. My career grew faster. My confidence became unshakable. My relationships deepened. Because I was finally pouring into what mattered instead of bleeding energy into what didn't. The irony is that the people who once made you feel powerless can end up being the reason you discover your power, not because of who they are, but because of who you become in response to them. You become someone who can hold their ground, someone who can stay calm under pressure, someone who doesn't need to be liked in order to lead, someone who doesn't confuse someone else's dysfunction for your responsibility. That's what real strength is. Not how loud you can yell, but how clearly you can choose where your attention goes, where your energy flows, who gets access to your emotions. That's emotional sovereignty, and it changes everything. Because once you reclaim your emotional sovereignty, people can try to provoke you, guilt you, manipulate you, or intimidate you, but none of it sticks. Because your sense of self is no longer up for negotiation. That's the power bullies fear. That's why they escalate before they disappear. Because deep down, they sense you're no longer within reach. You're not playing the game anymore. You're not reacting the way you used to. You're not needing what you used to need. And so their tactics stop working. Their drama starts to feel boring. Their approval stops feeling necessary. And then, one day, you look around and realize they're not even in the story anymore. Not because they left, but because you did. You exited the emotional loop. You stopped dancing the same old dance. And in that stillness, you found something better than revenge. You found peace. You found clarity. You found yourself.